Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop on Site Management Tools and Practice. This session will be recorded. If you experience technical difficulty, please press *0 for assistance. Now I'd like to direct the audience to force their screen to full view by pressing the small icon located in the bottom right corner of your screen. You are looking for a blue box with arrows pointing out from the corners. Please click that icon now to bring the presentation to full view. At this time, I'll turn the podium to Liz Butchery.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Again, I'm Liz Butchery, the training coordinator at the Clinical Coordinating Center. Just to bring everybody up to speed, during session 2, Gloria recommended some techniques for virtual team building, and part of that recommendation, she had asked everybody to create and submit their own avatar to give somebody a visual layout of the team. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what everybody sent in. So here we go. Nikki, let's go ahead and open up the phone lines, and I'd like to invite the group to share their experience doing the avatar, picking it out, and what they think it says about them. I'm, of course, very captivated by Kathy Shore Wilson's avatar that is working on the hula hoops pretty hard there. So, Kathy, are you there?
I am here.
Talk to us about your avatar.
Sure. Well, I actually found this to be a fun and thought-provoking exercise to have to come up with something to represent myself. And after looking at many possibilities on the Internet, and there's millions of them out there, and thinking through that process, I finally settled on a colorful animated avatar who's hula hooping, and it's entitled Happy Girl. Reasons being that I believe all of life should be fun, and that definitely includes work. And managing a protocol can be a lot like hula hooping. You need to move, change as needed to keep all the hoops in the air.
I think that's great. It's a great visual image. It's really, really great. Does anybody else have something that they'd like to share about the avatar that they had created? How about you, Gloria?
Sure. Yeah, Kathy, I just want to say also that I love how you've used that as a metaphor for the work that you do.
Okay.
And keeping the hoops in the air instead of the balls in the air, and doing it while having a great time. So I really appreciate that image.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, mine was actually created by a friend of mine, and it does kind of represent the gleeful Gloria that I spoke about last week. And I think in Photoshop you can make a cartoon of a picture, and there are some other applications I think that do that. So that's what he did. He made the cartoon of a real picture of me and put it on this little dancing, leaping character. So that's me.
Great.
So this is Frankie, and Gloria does represent gleeful Gloria. I think I have to change my name this week from Frankie to Flower Child Frankie.
Mm-hmm.
And those of you who know me well have heard some of my stories of my sordid past in the 60s and 70s. And when I close my eyes at night and I'm not looking in the mirror and I think about what I look like, this is pretty much what I look like. So this is Frankie, roughly 1976 or so, and in my head that's still pretty much where I am. So it was a lot of fun trying to find something.
Great. So as you can see, this can be a fun way to achieve a visual layout of it at maybe various locations. It's turned out great, and I'd really like to thank everybody for putting in their avatars. And really,
and thank you, Liz, for sitting us all around the table. This is fun.
This is Sharon. I just wanted to say that it's great to see all of these, because these calls can be so weird when you haven't met people and don't know who you're talking to. So I enjoy seeing these. These are fantastic.
Great. Thanks for sending your picture, Sharon.
All right, Frankie, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you now.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and close the phone lines for now. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. Just thanks so much for hanging in with us these 3 sessions, and we're going to wrap up today. Again, as before, we're going to do some nuts and bolts in this session, and then we're also going to do some more fun stuff. Particularly talk about how to take care of yourself. You know, we've talked about just a whole lot that project managers are responsible for, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed and just feel like you're kind of crazy when these things are going on. So we're going to take some time at the end of the session and talk about taking care of you, taking care of that project manager, and making sure that you can stay healthy enough to manage effectively. So we'll start with some nuts and bolts first. And if you recall, session 1, we talked about setting up the project. Session 2, we talked about kind of the pre-initiation stuff. And for today's session, we wanted to talk about that point at which the study's been launched, and you as a project manager are no longer doing things like, running around making sure that there's, urine cup supplies on site, and you're not, making sure people are trained and all of your regulatory stuff's in place. So, your role is going to shift significantly once that site has gotten up and running and is now recruiting. And so I want to talk today about how do you monitor the progress of this study, because your job's not done once the site's launched. It just changes to more of a checking in and providing some ongoing supervision rather than a lot of the more logistical issues that we've talked about before. Well, whether you're the project manager for one site or whether you are managing a national study, one of the things that's really critical is to receive feedback regarding recruitment. Virtually every entity involved in the study will be asking the question, how is recruitment doing? And it's really important that you're able to provide some up-to-date information on this. But, why do people care? Why is this such a critical issue other than, of course, funding? Well, perhaps the most important reason to monitor the recruitment rate is to make sure that the study will be able to enroll a sufficient number of participants to ensure that the study is adequately powered to detect any differences that might be present between study conditions. Depending on the relative estimated efficacy of the various study interventions, CTN studies will have a minimum number of participants that are required to detect any differences. This number is usually determined during protocol development by doing something called power analysis. And I'm sure you guys have heard people talk about whether or not a study is sufficiently powered. Well, that's what we're talking about here, is doing a power analysis that gives us the number of participants we need in order to show a difference. And if the number of participants fall below that target enrollment, then it will be impossible for the researcher to say whether the lack of significant differences at the end is due to a true equality in efficacy or simply because there just weren't enough participants to provide the data. So maintaining a close eye on the recruitment rate and identifying any roadblocks to recruitment will allow the research team to ensure that the target enrollment will be met. Another reason to monitor the rate of recruitment is that this is an indicator of other site performance issues. Problems with the rate of recruitment may signal that there are other problems at the site. So sometimes it's just a symptom. For example, a site that's recruiting too slowly may have a staffing pattern that's not sufficient for handling all the study procedures, and therefore they can only take participants as they feel able to help them. Alternately, a very slow recruiting site may be having other systemic problems that indicate that the site's just no longer able to adequately host the study. It's not unusual for studies to lose one or more sites after the study begins, and often a noticeably low recruitment rate is one of the first signs that a site may be having some significant problems. On the other hand, a site that's recruiting above expectation will also need to be watched to make sure that staff can adequately handle the larger patient flow throughout the study. And then finally, the rate of recruitment impacts the number of staff hours needed and the cost of the study. And as we've noted in our previous sessions, the staffing issues demand that we walk a fine line. On one hand, we've got to have plenty of staff available to provide coverage for the study procedures, plus recruitment and retention, plus the flexibility to work with the participant scheduling needs and so forth. But on the other hand, we don't want to have a lot of staff who are just sitting around with nothing to do. So the recruitment rate is an indicator of how our staff time is being utilized. It's also an indicator of how well we're keeping up with the study timeline. If recruitment is slower than expected, then the node will need to consider about how many additional months the site will need to be open and the cost that's associated with that. And also, if the recruitment is faster than expected, then the node may need to consider whether it can afford for the site to maybe hire some additional staff or to maybe remain open in order to increase the target enrollment there. So in thinking about monitoring recruitment, there are more issues to consider than just the total number of people recruited for the study. Very few studies randomize or enroll everyone that presents to be in the study. So keeping an eye on that progression from that first call to successful randomization will let us explore the ratio of people who make it through from one level to the next. And for those who fail to pass through a level, it's really helpful for us to understand why that happened. Let me just give you an example. In a study we did a few years ago on pregnant substance users, there was a particular site that had something called a stabilization unit. And the study ruled out people who were going into residential care. So at this particular site, they were ruling out pregnant women if they planned to enter the stabilization unit. This was preventing the site from meeting the target of 0.7 participants randomized per week. Well, we talked with the staff about that, and in asking some questions about the stabilization unit, we decided that really that should not be a rule out, because typically what would happen is women would stay on the stabilization unit, and during that time they attended outpatient treatment with the women who were living in the community. The only thing they received as part of the stabilization unit, besides just general safe housing, were things like how to clean, how to cook, how to plan a meal, how to shop, that kind of stuff. And that was not considered substance abuse treatment. And then once the women leave the stabilization unit, they either received housing provided by the site or they returned to their previous living situation. So in thinking about the exclusion criteria, the pertinent exclusion criterion was self-report having a condition that would necessitate inpatient treatment and willingness to attend such treatment. Since the site technically did not have inpatient treatment on this unit, we decided that the women should not be excluded on this basis. So once we modified the SOP so that we no longer excluded women based on them being admitted to the stabilization unit, their randomization rate went from less than 0.2 randomized per week to 0.8 randomizations per week, which was actually a little bit above target. I just want to show you an example of a screening and study progress log that we're using in the current ancillary study, CTN 31A. One of the upfront concerns about this study was that since these participants would be only a subsample of the participants in the parent study, we might not have a sufficient percentage of people making it into the ancillary study. And that would be for a lot of different factors. We were concerned that perhaps the study staff would be too busy with the main study to approach participants in this ancillary, or perhaps a large number of those eligible for the ancillary would simply choose not to participate, and then we would have a group that was just self-selected. We also were concerned that perhaps not enough people in the parent study would meet the criteria for the ancillary study. So it was really critical that we were able to track the number of folks in each step toward randomization and monitor why they fell out. And in fact, what I'm showing you is the second version of the log, because the first version did not provide sufficient information regarding the number of people who were approached by the RA and why some of those folks that were in the parent study were not approached. So just real quickly, let me just run you through what this is. In the first column, we have an initial ID. As you know, before somebody is consented, you can't really capture any kind of identifying information, and so we had to just give a random initial ID based on the order, not in which they came, but the order in which we entered them on the log. Same kind of thing with the date approached. The date the approach info was entered. This is the date that the RA put that on the log, again, to protect any potential for discovering who that person might be. And then we just ask, were they approached, yes or no? If they were not approached, the fourth column there asks for the reason. And you see a code of 3 there. And we had a number of codes. I think the codes run like 1 through 6 as to why somebody might not be approached. And it might be that, well, they, came for 31, but then before we could catch them for 31A, they disappeared and were kind of lost to follow-up. Or it might be that because people in the parent study did not have to have cocaine or methamphetamine as their primary drug of choice like they do in the ancillary study, it may be that their drug of choice was something else. So we wanted to capture that to see whether or not we had a sufficient number of folks in the parent study who were actually going to be potentially eligible for the 31A. Then we checked, were they interested? Again, a column for if they were not interested, so we could see why some people who were approached and potentially eligible ended up saying, nah, no thank you. And in fact, one of the things we found by doing this was that there were a number of folks who actually were afraid of the blood draw, and that has been a bit of a drawback for some sites. Once you move on beyond that, then, we're looking at getting information once they consent into the ancillary study. So the date they were consented or the reason why they did not consent. We also wanted the randomization date of when they went into the parent study because there's a time frame between the parent study and when the ancillary study can be done. That just gives us a little double check on that. We can collect some demographics. And the reason that we collected them here, you might not always collect that, but for us, we needed to have a group of normal comparison participants, and those were going to be based on the demographics of the participants who were the cocaine and methamphetamine participants. And so we had to gather the demographics up front so that we had a way to double check, and when we set up our normal comparison parameters, we knew what kind of groups we were looking at. Then we want to know, were they eligible? If they were not eligible, why not? Finally, did they complete the visit? And if not, why did they not complete the visit? And that's given us a lot of information. And from this report, we regularly are able to access a number of reports which have allowed us to look at all of these different kinds of things, as well as provide regular reports to the site. And I just quickly want to show you a couple of those. This is a progress report that we send out to the sites on a weekly basis. Again, it just tells us how many people were offered study information compared to those who the subset of those that were consented, the subset of those that were eligible, and the subset of those that completed the visit. And at the end, if you look at that final column on the far right, it tells us how we're doing in meeting our stated goal of 0.8 completers per week. Also have a number of reports. This represents one of the reports that tell us why certain things aren't happening. And this particular one is the reasons why people were not consented. And so you can see some of them were not randomized into 31, some of them were no longer interested. Others had things that would have ruled that they found out up front, it would have ruled them out of the 31A study. And like I said, some of them, failed to come to the clinic and could not be reached for the 31A visit. So just an idea of some of the things that you can do by collecting some information on just on a simple little spreadsheet like this. Now that we have a way to track the numbers, it might also be useful to determine which of our recruitment methods are bringing in the best results. So for example, let's say we have $1,500 a month to spend on advertising for our study. Well, we might spend that $1,500 on radio advertising. And if that's providing, say, 99% of our successful screeners, that dollar value may feel really reasonable. However, if that same $1,500 a month only brings in maybe 20%, but having the staff visit local referral sources brings in 80%, then we want to look at dumping more of our money in perhaps the cost of staff time. That, by far, in this example, would be the better use of the money. And the only way to monitor the effectiveness of our various recruitment methods is to track them as potential participants contact the study team. Now again, in the 31A study, I told you we're also recruiting non-substance using normal comparison participants. And those folks are recruited from outside the treatment facility. So the screening and progress log for that group of folks in the study includes a column to capture the referral source for each person that calls the study line for pre-screening. With that information, we not only know which sources bring in the most people, but as you can see here, we also can compare the sources that provide us with participants that actually go ahead and randomize. So if you take a look at this report, you'll see the thing that's kind of differentially shaded indicates the number of folks who called in and said, "Hey, I'm interested in being in the study," while the gray bar indicates what portion of those actually consented, and of those who consented, if you look at the black bar, you'll see that represents that number. So I'm going to just ask your opinion as you look at this. Take a look at it for a minute. Take a look. We've got the bus ad has brought some people in, flyers and brochures, the newspaper ad, posters, the radio has brought in some calls, and relatives and friends. So thinking about that, I just want to do a poll real quick. And here's the poll. Which form of recruitment has had the most bang for the buck so far, do you think? So let's go ahead and let people vote. A lot of different thoughts on that. Okay, still voting. Looks like that's pretty much everyone has voted. So it looks like most of you feel like the relative and friend area has produced best. Probably coming in second is flyers and brochures, with the newspaper ad and the bus ad and the posters kind of tied for third place. Let's go ahead and close that poll. And I want to ask you another question then. So if you were the project manager on this study and you saw this particular report, and at this point you were going to sit down with your team and revise your recruitment plan, where do you think you would refocus your efforts? And let's go ahead and vote on that. It looks like most of the votes are in. Looks like most folks would, at that point, would refocus on flyers and brochures. And again, those are some really low-cost efforts in terms of the actual materials, but does have some cost in staff time. Probably second is relatives and friends. and there's a lot of ways that you might focus your efforts there. I know one of the things that happened in CTN 28 was about halfway through the study, because there were some problems with recruitment in some of the sites, they went to something called a snowball recruitment, which was where they would take someone who was currently in the study, and if they had someone who they would be willing to pass along the information for the study, and that person came in and was eligible for the study and consented for the study, and followed through with that, then the person who referred them would get a little, I think it was $5. So there's some strategies for boosting, relatives and friends, maybe developing some business cards that folks in the study can hand out to their friends. Lots of different things to think about. Now, I do have 3 people that say some strategy not listed here, and I wonder if we could open the lines for just a second. I'd be curious to hear what kind of other ideas people would have thought that were not listed here. Can we open the phone lines?
And all lines are open.
So if you're one of those who voted for some strategy not listed here, what kinds of things might you think about at this point? Sounds like
I wasn't one of the 3 that selected that, but just looking at one thing that seemed to draw a lot of people to our attention was food, like little snacks in the center. So that kind of drew a lot of people to inquire about the study, and then we could recruit them from that.
Okay. So having, like if it was a study that was in-house?
Yeah.
Having some food available, making the research area attractive to potential clients. Yeah, that's a good way to do that. Any other thoughts on other kinds of strategies that aren't listed here?
This is Charlotte, Delaware Valley Node. We had open houses at several of our sites on the MI study, and just made it open to the clinic and had brochures out on the table. And people came in. We actually baked cookies in the site, so it was in the methadone clinic, and it could be smelled all over. And we were so surprised. We didn't even expect, we didn't know what to expect. It would be a turnout, but actually it was pretty effective.
Wow, that's really great. Yeah, I think you can never, ever underestimate the power of food in drawing people, that's for sure. Well, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and close the phone lines again. Thank you all for those comments. That was really good. All right, let me turn it over to Gloria for a few minutes, who's going to talk a little bit about supervision.
Sure. The results of the last session, people filled out some evaluations, and the comments indicated that some people were requesting some discussion on this call about performance appraisal. How do you do employee evaluations? Now, this could certainly be a webinar in and of itself, but we wanted to at least address the question here to give you some guidelines and best practices to do that. So I'm just going to pull up a document. Which is kind of small font, but I think we can. Can I zoom that? Or can somebody?
Or I think on the user end, if people click the little hourglass that has the plus sign, you
can zoom it yourself. Very good. Okay. So these are recommendations for a legally sound performance appraisal, and these are guidelines that you can take a look at and keep at your disposal. But basically, the appraisal criteria should be specific, behavioral, and linked to a person's job description. The focus when you're doing a performance appraisal is really on results, not the process. So something like the RA completes data entry in a timely manner, or the RA completes data entry accurately. So really focused on what the person is doing in their job. The appraisal, of course, should be standardized and fair. This is to reduce any potential bias. Now, if you look toward the bottom with the legal theory and suggestions for limiting potential liability, there are some of the most germane legal issues to keep in mind. And on the next page, are some criteria for assessing performance. So you can certainly use these to help you with your performance appraisal. And this is also in the toolkit. So one of the things to think about, though, when you put together an evaluation is who's going to complete this evaluation. Often, the person completing the evaluation is a supervisor, and the way many evaluations work is that the supervisor completes the evaluation for the employee. But you might want to consider using multiple streams of input for a performance evaluation. And that could be just a self-evaluation, so it would be kind of a two-way evaluation. The supervisor evaluates the employee, and the employee evaluates his or her own performance, and that's a really useful tool to use so that people start reflecting on their own performance, and then you can compare how they think they're doing and how the supervisor or you think that they're doing. And 360-degree assessments are different, and that's where you get feedback from the employee, her supervisors, also coworkers, and even subordinates or people that person works with. Now, this is time intensive, and it can also produce some anxiety. But when done well, it can give excellent perspectives on an individual's performance from all different angles. And actually, a 360-degree assessment would be an excellent assessment for a project manager, given all the people that you work with. But we'll let you or your supervisor decide how you think about what you think about that, how you feel about that. But it's something to consider, getting input from different areas and different perspectives on a person's performance. And then finally, just always check with your local HR department to see what policies and procedures they have in place for evaluation. They could have tools that would be useful to you, or that you could develop some specific questions to supplement what they do. But always make sure that whatever you're doing, it's in line with your local HR. Okay, Frankie?
Wait, did we skip one? I just need to jump back. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to this one to talk briefly about just kind of ongoing supervision. Supervision of the study staff, can take a lot of a variety of forms, and as Gloria's talked about, meeting with folks for performance evaluations, observing on-site performance, and some of it involves ongoing teleconferences for the various specialties. Keep in mind that all of the members of the study team will need supervision, especially at the beginning of the study, and that's so that we can ensure that the study procedures are being administered correctly. So project managers may find themselves needing to coordinate supervision duties with other senior members of the study team in order to assure that some of the very specialized supervision needs are met. At this point, I'd like to open up the phone lines for us to just kind of talk a little bit about some of the ways in which some supervision has occurred throughout the CTN trials, and some thoughts that you might have about some specific issues. So if we could go ahead and open up the phone lines.
And all lines are open.
Thank you. We we had asked a couple of people to chime in here, folks that I know who have been involved in some study supervision. And one of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about, Scott, are you on the phone?
Yes, I'm on the phone.
Yeah. So wanted to ask Scott if he would talk a little bit about some of the centralized supervision that's been provided by the lead node for the 30 study.
And when you say centralized supervision, kind of sites?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
When you say centralized supervision, how we work with the other sites?
Yeah, I was thinking in particular like the research calls that you do, the research staff calls, and the medical clinician calls. If you could
Sure.
just talk about that a minute.
Just to step back for a second, I think when we're operating as a lead node, supervision may be defined a little differently. In a sense, we're kind of providing guidance and helping sites to the extent possible adhere to the protocol. So we're kind of like providing a lot of technical assistance and resource support. And some of the things that we've done in operating the CTN 30 study, which is the large prescription opiate study, is we have routine calls with the research staff to go over any kind of cross-cutting areas that might be affecting sites. We also give them an opportunity to ask questions that they may be confronting. For example, issues like data entry, or when we're earlier on in the study, questions about various assessment instruments. And then we had calls with the medical clinicians, again, kind of a routine call, which gave the medical clinicians a forum to ask questions about how the medical intervention was delivered, actually the prescription of the buprenorphine naloxone. And we also had routine calls with the counseling staff. So it wasn't like formal supervision, but it was a way for us at the lead node to provide guidance and technical assistance to the site.
Thanks, Scott. And yeah, so you all provided that ongoing centralized common voice so that everybody was hearing the same message. And that actually, I'm a local project manager for 30, and I know that that's made things a lot easier on my end as I try to supervise locally.
I would also say it started up front when we had the trainings for the sites, the initial trainings. We had 2 trainings, one for the first 3 sites that started, and then for the remainder of the sites. And we did those trainings at a centralized location in Washington near NIDA. So it was a way to kind of get people on board with in terms of the protocol right away, and then build those relationships so that the ongoing calls and ongoing meetings would be much more efficient after that.
Now, Gloria, for CTN 15, you all actually did counselor supervision in a centralized manner. Is that right?
Actually, counselor supervision was done locally at the sites.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so we had a real hybrid model of supervision. We had the counselors being supervised locally by their local supervisors who had been also trained in the intervention. And then those supervisors received centralized training from the lead node. And it was really in the spirit of the early CTN of disseminating early and seeing how interventions did in the hands of clinicians and supervisors. And so that's what we did. And we also, for the research staff, had centralized calls. We had weekly calls, and then more specific calls for certain assessment tools that were being used or whatever. So we provided, most of the centralized supervision was really for the research staff, but then we also had, we trained the supervisors to do local supervision.
Right. I remember that now.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings up a really good point, and that's that we as project managers are not necessarily the folks with the expertise to do supervision of other fields. And Amy, are you on the call?
Frankie, this is Linda. Amy's out ill today.
Oh, she's out sick. Okay. Well, one of the questions that I had for Amy was, and somebody else, feel free to jump in here. I just wondered if we could talk a minute about the challenges of trying to supervise study staff who are in fields other than what we're trained in. So, for example, I'm not a medical person, but as a project manager, there may be times when I have to provide some level of supervision to a study medical clinician, certainly not on how to do medical procedures, but on other kinds of procedures that are study related. And I just wonder, what kind of thoughts folks have about that. Was there ever a time when you were called upon to provide study supervision and you felt uncomfortable because of that?
Frankie, this is Emily. I know for me in a project, it wasn't a CTN project, but I was in a position where I was to provide supervision to the physicians as well. And that was very difficult, and I actually deterred that a lot to the PI because it was a very awkward situation for me with not a medical degree to try to provide them feedback, so more feedback than supervision, but just feedback on their study performance.
Yeah, I think it can be really difficult, and as you put together as a lead project manager, you can think about the technical supervision of presenting that from maybe a centralized fashion, or set up a system where you have an expert on site that supervises that person, and then you help the supervisor. But I think at the local level in particular, project managers have to approach all kinds of people, and sometimes that's not the most comfortable thing. Well, let's go ahead and close the phone lines. Again, that's just something that I wanted to briefly talk about before we moved on. So we're kind of talking about ways in which we might monitor study progress, and so supervision and performance feedback is one of those. Another one is that's commonly used is a system of fidelity checks that monitor whether or not the study staff are correctly administering some of the study procedures. Now, this is a little bit different from what we would call traditional supervision, because what this requires is that a trained person actually reviews the procedure against a checklist of standards to demonstrate whether or not that the study staff is actually adhering to that list of standards. Now, again, as a project manager, you may not be the person who's actually doing the fidelity rating, but you will need to make sure that all the fidelity procedures are smoothly coordinated if they're set to be in a study. You may need to monitor things like whether or not the recordings were selected on time, whether or not the regular review was done in a timely manner, and also whether or not the recordings were, if they are on hard media, were they returned to proper storage after the rating had occurred. So it's still your responsibility, even though you're not necessarily the one performing the actual fidelity rating. You want to make sure that strict confidentiality is maintained in the submission of these materials, and so that you need to be familiar with two documents. One is the training plan, and that should outline how these fidelity measures are going to be handled. And then there'll also be some kind of a tracking sheet or a log in the study that's used to monitor this. So you'll need to know things like the time frames and what you're tracking it on, and you should periodically review that tracking sheet to make sure that the submissions are occurring as required. And of course, if you're the lead project manager, you'll need to remember to provide the participating sites with clear instructions and a tracking sheet or log for the submission of the fidelity ratings. Let me just show you an example of one. This was this is similar to what was used in a previous study. And again, I'm not really going to go over it, but I just wanted to show you that this one, and then there's some others that are also available to you in that toolkit on LiveLink, including one that has multi-page sheets that also includes a system for automatically randomly selecting the recording for supervision. And the third way that we can monitor study progress reports, or monitor study progress, is through these interim reports like the trial progress report and the study data report and the interim monitoring reports. These are provided by a number of people. Some of them are provided by the Clinical Coordinating Center, some by the Data and Statistics Center. Sometimes those two combine information, and other kinds of reports are created locally, and even others will come directly from the lead node. So as a progress or as a project manager, you just want to make sure that when these come into your inbox, you don't just go, oh yeah, that's nice, and file it away, but you actually take a look at it, because it can give you a lot of information about the different kinds of activities going on at the site that you're managing and how well they're doing. The project manager's role in ensuring good site performance starts during pre-initiation, and it doesn't stop until the last study participant has completed. Before the site initiates, it's critical that you work with the study team to develop site-specific guidelines and SOPs for ways in which the RAs will follow up after missed visits. Oftentimes, the lead team will provide a minimum set of standards, but a good study team will also develop specific steps for your site that go above the minimum standards and take into account any kind of circumstances that are peculiar to your site. So that might include developing some local sheets that show time frames for implementing follow-up procedures, or any kind of a variety of things that you might do. And as with all our handouts, I've posted some of these in the toolkit on LiveLink. So please feel free to use it or develop something that would fit for you. Periodically, you should spot check to ensure that the RAs are applying the follow-up efforts consistently across the board. And then finally, you need to be willing to pony up some time and resources in order to assist the site in following up with particularly difficult participants. It might mean that you are the one who makes the follow-up call or text to get around the participant who appears to be ignoring calls from the site. With the advent of caller ID, we find that oftentimes if a participant would really, just trying to avoid us, but we really need to get some information from them. Sometimes if they won't talk to us, they might talk to a study physician. Sometimes the word doctor actually carries a lot of weight, whereas, just a simple, a regular research staff person will not be deemed important enough to talk to. But you want to make sure that you're trying multiple ways and that you're working to brainstorm with your site and assisting them in whatever way possible. So in session 2, we talked about communicating as a virtual team and some ways in which we could help the study team stay engaged during the call. And one very important method that we discussed was the use of the teleconference and the teleconference agenda. So now I want to look specifically at the project management teleconference and the role that it can play in ensuring good study performance. Whether we're talking about the national project teleconference or one at the local level, the purpose really is the same. The teleconference should serve as a mechanism for building both competence and confidence among the study team. The structure of the call may vary depending on the team, but in general, these 4 elements should be included somehow. Maintaining relationships among the callers, checking in to see how things are going, problem solving for any emergent issues, and encouraging the team to keep up their motivation for doing a good job on the study. So how do you maintain relationships on a teleconference? Well, Gloria demonstrated a little bit of that last session by demonstrating some team building exercises that could be done on the phone. Another way is to recognize folks for special accomplishments, such as reaching a study goal or perhaps something personal. And for those of you who are in 31, Anthony Floyd, was really good about this while he was managing the 31 study. Up front, he collected everybody's birthdays, and on the call, once a month, he would always wish folks a happy birthday if it was around their birthday time. It's also okay to allow a little time for chit-chat, weather, sports, current events. I know anytime that Dennis, the Deni, if you will, get on, there's always a football discussion about the Pittsburgh Steelers and the, I don't know what the Washington teams are, Eagles or something. I'm not a football player type. But anyway, so, there's always 2 or 3 minutes of, this little rivalry, coastal rivalry about the NFL. And, it just makes for a nice little personal connection. Obviously, it's important that you limit the time for this. You can't talk about it the whole hour. But it does allow for the maintaining of a relationship. During the last session, one issue that kept coming up was the importance of the agenda. If we're going to have everybody on the team check in, as we talked about last time, then it's really critical that they know in advance what they're supposed to check in about. So a structured agenda can really help in this department. And whether the agenda is written or simply just a matter of always asking for things in the same order, providing that level of predictability always allows people to prepare in advance. It's also important that the communication on the call goes both ways. As project managers, we need to provide information and feedback to the team, but we also need to expect them to provide some information to us. And so one helpful method is to always have a spot on the agenda for providing updates on the current status of the trial. For national teleconferences, this might include placing the most current recruitment and retention information right there on the agenda. Locally, it might involve summarizing the status of items on the trial progress report, or it might even involve things like putting individual, client issues. So let me just show you one method that we're using to structure a local teleconference in a current trial here in the OVN. Let me just bring that up. Just real quickly, you'll see some common elements here, and this is a standing agenda. We always talk about how many folks are in the pipeline, how many screenings. In the red here, you'll see we have how many are in active phase, how many in follow-up, how many are missing in action, how many screeners this week, and how many we've randomized so far. And then as you scroll through, you'll see that each active participant has some information about them based on the last study visit. Where are they? When's their next appointment? What dose are they on? How are they doing? And in the case of this particular study, it was being done at a clinic that drew from folks up to 3 hours away. We found that had a lot to do with follow-up, and so we started putting the mileage, how far away they lived from the clinic, just as part of the standing agenda, so that as you see, these folks in pink are the folks who are indicated as missing in action. Obviously, when we're looking at somebody who's missing in action from 50 miles away, you might approach that slightly differently than someone who's missing in action that's only 24 miles away. We also would include staff coverage and upcoming out-of-office time, as well as some standing miscellaneous items, supplies, follow-up efforts, and any particular upcoming visits from like DCRI or MS for monitoring. So again, that's not how you have to do it, but it's just a little example of what a sample standing agenda might look like locally. So we just want to make sure that we have an opportunity in each call to look at some participant issues. Locally, those can be individual participant issues. At a national call level, they might be something about dealing with a certain kind of participant or
perhaps reviewing things like the serious adverse events in a study. Logistics issues, supplies, team-wide performance issues, and sometimes you might want to involve a training booster as a part of your national or local call. And then remember that Barbara Fredrickson research on the power of positivity? Well, we really want to increase your team's positivity ratio so that they're hearing way more positive messages from you than negative ones. So use your teleconference to let your team know just how smart and creative and hardworking and caring and motivated they are, which leads me to the final strategy for ensuring good study performance, and that is maintaining enthusiasm. You want to make sure that your study team always knows that you are in their corner. While you don't want to falsely deliver a bunch of contrived accolades, there's always going to be some way in which you can let them know that you're rooting for them. If we could just open the phone lines up for just a second, I'd like to hear from those of you on the call about some ways in which you've found that you can cheerlead for your team.
And all lines are open.
This is Lynn from Hopkins.
Yeah.
And what I've done, because this is my first experience with this actually, and through things learned from the supervisory training class at Hopkins, I let them know at the end of the day how much I appreciate the hard work that they've done. I say thank you, for the things that they've done, and I even provided breakfast like during the week of administrators, even though they aren't administrators, but I provided breakfast just to say kind of like thank you for your services and how much I really appreciate them.
Yeah, that's nice. And I think you bring up a really good point that it doesn't have to be something big and lavish. Just a general, ongoing recognition of thanking them for putting out their best effort.
Right.
That's really nice. What other ideas are out there?
Thank you. This is Julie. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
During one of the studies where we were a lead team, occasionally we would send out, a card to a site for, recognizing something that was going on, whether it was that they had met the recruitment goal for that month or a week, or had gotten a bunch of follow-ups in, or just gotten through like a really difficult time, that the site had faced. And it was interesting to see how one little card would get all these emails coming in saying, thanks as a lead team for recognizing our work. And so it was just, a really simple thing that seemed to, really mean a lot to them.
Right. That's a great example. And again, it doesn't, and I've seen some studies or some teams where you were able, you did have the resources to do something pretty spectacular. I know in 28, they were able to actually get the funds to provide like gift baskets to folks who met certain recruitment goals. And that was really nice, but you don't even really have to go that far. Just something simple like a card or lots of times even just an email, maybe having the PI of the note send an email to the site telling them, how they appreciate the job they're doing. One of the things that we do here in Ohio Valley is just trying to always, again, say thank you and always try to recognize something that they're doing positively. We try to celebrate goals by, if we can, by, like a pizza party or something like that. That incorporates not just the site staff, if it's local here, but really all of the staff, recognizing that folks at both the RRTC and the CCP had a hand in that, so celebrating together. But yeah, these are great ideas. Any other thoughts?
Thank you. This is Charlotte.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always found really helpful in regards to performance evaluations, the annuals, is that I make notes to myself throughout the year when someone does something especially well, or something above and beyond, and then I keep the details of that and put it into the performance review, which, people really appreciate because I don't think they expect that we'll remember, gee, last August I did a really great job with this. So
that's a great idea.
I've just always found that that's really helpful and appreciated. And it makes it easier for me when it's time to write them.
Right, yeah, that's that's a positive thing too. But that is that there's a real qualitative difference between saying, you've done a great job, and saying, you've done a great job, and let me give you some specific examples of that. So that's a great idea, Charlotte. Thank you for that. Okay, well, just in the thanks again for all these thoughts, and unfortunately we have to move on for the sake of time. So let's go ahead and close the line. I want to talk about one more little thing in terms of maintaining relationships with your team, and that is maintaining relationships with the site, even folks who are at the site who are not involved in the study team. One of the things that we have provided for you, I think Liz actually probably sent it to you in the form of a handout, but we've also put it on live link in the toolkit, is something called site support ideas. And these are just some ideas that we've gathered, and again, it would be really great if you have other ideas, if you could add to that. Focusing on how to maintain relationships with the sites, including the folks who are not directly involved with this study. In general, we've kind of broken those down into 3 categories. One is to integrate the study staff into the CTP milieu. The other one is kind of the flip side of that, incorporating the entire CTP into the study somehow. And then finally, to maintain really clear communications back and forth. And I won't go over these specific ideas. They're spelled out, I think, pretty clearly for you. But I would just like to encourage you to, don't neglect that part of it, because even though you're mostly focused on the study team, there are an awful lot of people behind the scenes who work at the CTP who make your life a lot easier that you may never even have a chance to know what they've done to kind of pave the way for your study team. And so you need to make sure that, at minimum, you need to be respectful of that, and the optimum is that you include them in on celebrations and that you really recognize the role that they play. All right. So that's the nuts and bolts piece. Let me turn it now over to Gloria, who is going to talk about supermanager syndrome.
Yes, and it can be a syndrome. And we won't completely define it here, but you know who you are. We did not have the resources to provide the T-shirts or capes this time around, but you may have your own. So are you a supermanager? We realize many of you have been known to at least try to leap tall buildings in a single bound. But let's face it, that's kind of hard on the legs. But we become leaders, and the project manager is a leader because we're ambitious, and we're responsible, and we like to get things done. Sometimes, though, we can go a little overboard and feel like we have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. I think we all can recall some images where Superman did that, too. So without requiring you to turn in your badge of honor or your cape or your T-shirt, let's talk about ways that you can still be a great project manager without having to be stronger than a locomotive. And back to the train metaphor, you could ask any conductor that that's just not possible for mere mortals like ourselves. So here are some tools that you can use to manage it all. You don't have to have superpowers, but you can use the tools of time management, good delegation, maintaining good boundaries, and practicing self-care to do a great job without having to stop a speeding bullet. So here, just have a quote for you. And staying with the conductor theme, we could say that the bad news is that time keeps rolling down the track, but the good news is that you're the conductor. So we discussed in the first session that the conductor has many roles and responsibilities and needs to be really aware of the time. As project manager, especially if you're managing multiple studies, time management is one of the keys to your success. So first of all, we need to acknowledge and realize that time management is a myth. No matter how organized we are, there's always only 24 hours in a day. Time doesn't change. All we can actually manage is ourselves and what we do with the time that we have. So one important thing in time management is to create time management goals. The focus of time management is really to change your behavior, not change time. So a good place to start is by eliminating your personal time wasters and identifying what are your personal time wasters. So it could be personal email, personal calls, checking your Facebook page, things like that. And we all have them, but it can be really informative to realize how much time goes to these potential wasters. So to set goals, we need to identify what our potential time wasters are. And then you could set a goal that you're going to minimize those or eliminate those for an entire week. And then as you do this, you can see how much time you saved as a result of setting these goals. Now, related to this is to implement a time management plan. The objective is to change your behaviors over a time to achieve whatever general goal you've set for yourself, like increasing productivity or decreasing stress. And these are all, this is all a result of having good time management, is that your productivity increases and your stress reduces. So you need to not only set your specific goals, but track them over time. And people use all kinds of tools for time management. Many people use a day planner, still the paper and pencil book. A lot of us use Outlook or our Palm Pilots or whatever, some electronic device to manage our time. You can, I think a lot of people use that to create a schedule, create reminders, and those can be really useful tools in time management. Another important thing to do for time management is to prioritize your tasks. And here, again, it's a matter of sitting down and determining what your tasks are. Especially if you're managing multiple studies, you're going to have multiple tasks in a day for different studies. So a great thing to do is to start your day with a mini time management session by planning out writing down your to-do list, what are the things that really need to be done today, and then prioritizing the ones that are most important and giving them the time that they need. You may want to do this on a daily basis. You could do this on a monthly basis. You could do it on a weekly basis. You could also use the SMART goals that we talked about last time, that they're specific and manageable, realistic, time-bound. It's important to set time limits for different tasks. And we might have goals of, we want to reach our recruitment numbers in 14 months, and that's a large time limit. But we could do that kind of goal setting and time limit setting even on a day-to-day basis. So a task on your to-do list could be to review that IRB submission before it goes in, and you want to set aside a specific time and a time limit to do so. I work really well on a deadline, and most of us do. So setting those mini deadlines during your day can really help you manage your time. And then finally, you need to get organized. We have provided you a tremendous amount of great tools and resources in the toolkit to help you get organized, which is going to save you time in the long run. But if you're not sure where all that stuff is, that's just going to waste time. So if you can put some time in the outset to get organized and know where everything is, then that is going to save you time as well.
Gloria, this is Frankie. Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of bring up the thought that as a project manager, you are not always the person who's in charge of setting the priorities, and that sometimes that can be kind of frustrating when you have certain things that you need to get done, but keeping in mind that you're living in an active organism, particularly if you're working on more than one study or more than just being the project manager for a study. And you have, there's a certain level of flexibility that has to be maintained. I think a really good example of that is that I was rolling along, doing just fine, kind of managing the studies under my belt, and then all of a sudden we got word about the challenge grants that have just whose submission date has just passed. And suddenly the priorities around here shifted very quickly. And I was, some of the things that had a very high priority previous to that had to take a back seat for a while. And I think that's okay. I think sometimes as project managers, we get really frustrated when that happens and feel like, oh gosh, we're not accomplishing what we need to do. But I think that all too often we don't appreciate that it's okay. It's okay to have flexible priorities, and it's okay to have that as a moving target, and to ask for help if we need help on catching up with some things that maybe have to take a back seat while we pay attention to something else. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Absolutely, and that actually segues beautifully into the next topic of avoiding being a super manager, which is to delegate. And so in a situation like the one that you were just describing, Frankie, possibly you then had to hand off some of the tasks that were on your priority list to somebody else to do. Sometimes you can't just put things on the back burner. You need to then enlist the assistance of others and delegate out. So that is a task and a skill that as the project manager you really need to get a good handle on. So it's a natural part of your role as a project manager to delegate. You're overseeing the entire study, but you also have staff who perform the specific roles, like the RAs, the trainers, the QA, and regulatory staff, of course. And so the first important component of delegation is choosing the right person to delegate the task to. Like we talked about last time, if you can consider a person's strengths when preparing to delegate a task, you will come off all the better. If you have one person on your staff who's more of a people person and another who's more detail-oriented, consider delegating more interpersonal tasks, like following up with clients, perhaps, with participants, to the former person, and tasks that require greater attention to detail, like some data checking or one of those organizational tasks that you need for time management. You might want to delegate something like that to somebody who's more detail-oriented. A common win-win situation is when delegating the task not only saves you time, but it also gives the other person a valuable learning experience or skills training or an interesting opportunity for them. And somebody on our last call talked about that as a way of kind of engaging and appreciating their staff is giving them some different and diverse things to do to keep them interested. And it not only keeps them interested and gives them more skills and hopefully plays on their strengths, but then it also frees you up to do some other activities. So that's a real win-win situation. And when you're delegating, you always want to keep that in mind and always shoot for that win-win approach. Now, for your delegation to really work, you will still need to monitor the progress of the task execution and know if the task is actually completed. And again, a lot of the tools that we've reviewed really give you the opportunity to do that in a pretty structured way. You want to delegate but also be involved and available, and that increases everyone's success. When you delegate, as I'm sure we all know, you're still responsible to be sure that the task is completed, and that is one of the primary functions of the project manager, is to make sure that everything's getting done the way it needs to be. So I think we've given you a lot of good tools to monitor the outcomes of the different tasks that do get delegated out. So now I'm going to just open up the phone lines and see if people have any experiences to share about ways that they've successfully delegated tasks in their role as project manager. So if we could open up the lines.
And all lines are open at this time.
Thank you.
Hi, Gloria.
Yes.
Megan.
Hi, Megan.
Hi. I just wanted to say that in my experience, as the more time I've been managing, the easier it is to delegate or to figure out how to do it. And for example, here we run the 30 study here, and we're running it at 2 different sites. So I've been overseeing the 2 different sites, and so and we have 3 IRBs. So for example, the Joanne Gomez, who's one of the RAs at St. Luke's, who's been here for a long time, something that was good to delegate to her was helping to deal with the St. Luke's IRB, since I'd never had to deal with them before, and she has had to deal with them for the past few years. So that was one area where we could work together on part of it, but she could actually handle doing the submissions for the IRB for St. Luke's.
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense because she was there and she had that experience. And given that you do have these 3 IRBs to deal with, that was a good thing to get off your plate.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? And I think your other point of the more you do it, the more experience you get at it, the easier it becomes. So you have to just get out there and do it.
This is Linda in Oregon, and we're doing another study right now where we're trying to recruit adolescents. And one of our RAs, Dawn, has a lot of experience with our community partners in schools. And because of a relationship there, she's able to bring in a lot of potentials.
That's great. So again, kind of focusing on what a person's connections, their expertise, their interests, and fitting the task to that, or fitting them to the task and matching that up. That's great. Anyone else?
This is Ed at Delaware Valley.
Hi, Ed.
Hi. I keep on going back to your comments about the agenda. And I use the agenda as an organizing force for the research team in terms of having a weekly session with a research team at the site. And what I found is that it's sometimes hard not to do the work in the meeting, but whenever possible, what I try to do is work it out so that the agenda reflects potential issues that are coming up, and there are always surprises. But then right there in the session, we try to cooperatively assign tasks or create ad hoc groups in order to meet the needs of particular things. And I try very hard as a leader of the meeting not to take on any responsibility there. So sometimes my method of delegating is to get somebody else to step forward during the meetings because it's their area of concern, it's their area of expertise or responsibility, and then support them, and then congratulate them along the way, put it in the minutes, saying that they did a good job, and then you have during the year a feedback system for later on doing appraisals. that doesn't work for the larger things necessarily, except that for the larger things which you can't deal with inside the meeting, you can create another moment, another grouping, another something or other that you can follow through on later.
That's a great example of really pulling a lot of these concepts we've been talking about together. You know, using the agenda, creating the different tasks and being clear about the different tasks that are needed, providing support, congratulating people, pulling out some of that information for later performance appraisal. So that's a fantastic example. And I like the cooperatively assigning tasks in a group is great. And I think your other example of stepping back and really kind of making people take other tasks or maintaining your own boundary there is really important and something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So I'm going to just keep the lines open because I'll have another question for you in a minute. But what we're going to do, it's my last chance to really jump on the train metaphor that we started these sessions with. So we're going to pull into delegation station and check our bags. So how are you going to manage it all? We need to figure out what bags we need to carry and which to hand off to the porter or which we could check at the gate. So your assignment this week, and we have we're going to talk about this. Your assignment this week is to choose one task and delegate it to someone else. Think about your activity over the past week. If you have records, review them. Note the tasks that you would rather not be spending so much time on. From these, choose the one that has the highest freedom value for you. In other words, freedom from which task would do the most for you. Don't limit yourself to business-related tasks here when you're making your selection. It may make more sense to you economically or emotionally to free yourself of the task connected with your personal life to support your professional life, and that's fine. So whatever tasks you've chosen, now do the research, make the call, and delegate that task to someone or something else. This is the hat that you will not be wearing next week. Now, I also do personal executive coaching, and if this were a coaching call, I would ask you to come up with a commitment and do it by a certain date, and then ask you to let me know that you got it done. So we're going, and what I have found to be the most powerful thing about coaching is the accountability factor, that you know that there's somebody that you're accountable to, that you're going to report back to and tell them your progress. And it's very similar to being a project manager.
Yes.
And being just supportive of people and helping them follow through on their goals. So we would like you to commit to delegating something this week and then let us know how you did by emailing ctntraining@emis.com to give you that little accountability for the next week. So does anybody have a task that right off the top of their head they know that they'll delegate this week and are willing to make a verbal commitment to the group?
And our lines are still open at this time.
Thank you. Yes, the silence was not because the lines were closed. Anyone have a commitment of something to delegate?
I can tell a story of something I recently delegated.
Oh, great.
And this doesn't have anything to do with here at work, although it has really helped me in my work. I do a lot of different things. I work full-time. I am also involved in an urban ministry, and I have a lot of other kinds of personal things going on. And I've really been struggling for the last several months about my house. And I have this really great house, but just trying to find some time to clean it has just about driven me crazy. And I had my son who's in college. I had him helping me some, but then he got busy with his comps, and then he wasn't able to do it anymore. And so I was stressed out at home. I was stressed out at work. I wasn't sleeping, and a lot of it was because I just couldn't find time for everything that had to happen. So I finally just decided, you know what? I have the financial means to do this, and I just picked up the phone and I called Mary Maid. And I said, come out and do a spring cleaning, and then I want you to come every other week after that. And so they did, and I cannot tell you, there are not words to describe how good it felt the day that I got home from work after a long day of the craziness here and walked in my door, and everything was spotless, and it smelled good, and there were no more cat hair balls, laying on the floor, no dust bunnies under the couch. It was just really great, and that really has reduced my stress so much. Just getting that little piece of something off my plate, that I've actually had a lot more energy, remarkably more energy, just by removing that little piece of stress.
And, if you have the resources to do something like that, that's great, but you can do even smaller things, or, enlisting the help of your family, or those around you, or roommates, or other people, to get what you need to get done, can be a huge boon for you. So start thinking about that, and please let us know in the next week what you've delegated. We'll be eager to hear about it. I recently did some delegating in my business and handed over some clerical things that were just really bogging me down, and hired somebody to do them. And again, I needed to spend a little, but boy, it was really worth every penny to free me up to do the things that I love and do better. Again, we're talking about strengths, and moved me forward in a way that then really lightened my anxiety and lightened my load. So, very good. All right, so we can close the phone lines again as we move on. You really want to promote independence in your team, and by delegating tasks and letting the people on your team do their jobs, you allow them to succeed and demonstrate their accomplishments in ways that can be really satisfying and self-motivated to them. So by being a supportive leader, you can get your needs met while respecting and developing others. Let your team members shine. Here's another quote to read. Striving for balance. Stephen Covey, he wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we have been talking about strengths and weaknesses, as well as the importance of letting others develop their strengths while playing down their weaknesses. We certainly want people to be as balanced as possible, but ready to help them see where they fit and work best. This quote by Stephen Covey made me think of the balance we need to strike in our own lives as we're working in the CTN and working other places as well. This work-life balance can really be very elusive. So let's talk a little bit about balance and boundaries, which we've already started to talk about. So pushing the limits, why does it feel like I'm working all the time? Well, maybe you are. There are a number of factors that have to do with our virtual teams, technology, and lifestyles that lead us to pushing the limits and boundaries of our jobs, having work leak or flood into our personal lives. And one challenge that we have working in multi-site clinical trials is that our work goes across time zones. Work continues around the country, and those extra 3 hours from coast to coast can draw you into an increasingly long workday. Since I work on the West Coast and most of my colleagues are on the East Coast, I'm often up at 6 to start my day with my East Coast counterparts. And some days I'm done by 2, and other days I'm working into the evening. So since we do work across these time zones, it poses an additional challenge to setting limits. Also, we are now using advanced communication technology to work from anywhere. We can work from our homes, we can work from our cars, we can work sitting on the beach, we can work anywhere and any time, even on vacation. And sometimes that becomes expected of us. So I've got a little poll. So how many of you, or do you, have a BlackBerry, Trio, iPhone, or other device on which you check your email from work, for work? All right, so about a quarter of you do. And the rest of you are maintaining really good boundaries by not having it. All right, and now for those who do, how often do you check this device for work-related emails? Guess it depends on the day. I'm answering a poll myself. So it's pretty distributed with almost half of the people who have one checking their work emails once or twice a day. And this might change based on whether or not you're in the office or not. And if you're out of the office, that number might go up. But we definitely have a greater access to technology and greater access to work where we don't just shut off our computer and walk away. It follows us wherever we go. So it's just something to be really aware of. Another thing is that people are working longer hours, not only because of time zones, but employers are commonly asking employees to work longer hours than they're scheduled. And if we're working on a study where a clinic is open, like a methadone clinic that opens very early, or an outpatient clinic that's open in the evenings, we may need to be on call in a way that requires us to work a lot more hours than we really signed up for, or that is included in our job description. And then finally, our changing family roles as potentially dual career couples, or other commitments that we have to family, friends, and community are really drawing us in and pushing the limits of the time that we're spending at work and then in other activities as well. So what I want to do here as a way of wrapping up is to start talking more specifically about practicing self-care. And getting a cleaning lady is a fabulous self-care device, and I think I've actually have it listed here somewhere. But the reason I use the word practice is that it's something that we really need to keep working on and keep practicing in order to make it happen. So again, we can track what we do. We can keep a log, include work-related and non-work-related activities, and decide what's necessary and what's most satisfying. If you can cut or delegate the activities you don't enjoy or have time for, that is a really good way of taking care of yourself. Now, there may be situations where you may not have the authority to do that, but that's something that you can talk to a supervisor about to possibly do. Also, you can find out if you can take advantage of certain options that might be available to you, like flex hours, comp time, a compressed work week, job sharing, or telecommuting for the role that you do. This flexibility may alleviate some of your stress and free up some of your time. Also, just say no. Whether it's a coworker asking you to spearhead an extra project or your child's teacher asking you to manage the class play, remember that it's okay to respectfully say no. I did that twice last week, and I felt great. I was really tempted to take on both of these tasks because they appealed to they were different, but they were appealing to me because one of them was really acknowledging me for work that I had done and asking me to do something that I thought was very special. Actually, both of them were like that, and that really appealed to my need for being recognized and to be an achiever. And then I started I said, you know what, I'm going to start writing these things down. So I wrote down all of these kind of projects that I've been taking on, and I realized there was just no way that I could take on these other two projects, no matter how alluring they were. So the loss of those two projects was far outweighed by the relief that I felt by saying no. So I highly recommend it. Make it a common and useful word and much needed word in your vocabulary, while still maintaining your positivity. Don't forget about that. Also, if you can, leave work at work. If you're able to shut down your computer, turn off the email part of your phone and leave it at work, and I realize there are some days that we can do that and some days that we can't, but if you can realistically appraise on a day-to-day basis, can I today just leave it all behind, leave it all at work, that can be excellent self-care. So another slide, because it's definitely worth 2 slides, practicing self-care. Manage your time well, and we've already talked about that. Rethink your cleaning standards. If you can't afford a house cleaner, really, are those dust bunnies hurting anyone? I don't know. Maybe every dish doesn't have to be put away from the drainer. There are some people who are more conscientious about that than others, but there might be some things that you can let slide to give yourself a break to take care of yourself. You want to nurture yourself and set aside some time for an activity each day that you enjoy, even if that's maybe a 15-minute break in the middle of your day where you could get out of the office and take a walk. That could be really wonderful way to take care of yourself. Working out, listening to music, reading, practicing yoga, taking a bath, watching your favorite show on the DVR. I was complaining before that I was way backed up on my DVR watching. If you don't have a DVR, make sure you get one, because that's a huge time management tool. If you don't know that already, and I'm sure you do. But make sure to set some time aside to nurture yourself, and also some time to have fun and to do something that you love to do. Some hobby that you have, or some fun thing that you like to do with your friends or your family, photography or bike riding, scrapbooking, going out to clubs, whatever it is. If you can make sure that you have time that you can set aside to do something good for yourself and have some fun. Do the hula hoop, as we saw at the beginning. So all those things can really help your self-care. And finally, make sure that you have a good support system, somebody that you can talk to when things are stressful, that can help you feel better and get some things off your chest. So just as a way to wrap up, we're going to open up the phone lines and see if anybody would like to share any of their self-care strategies with the group. So if we could open the phone lines.
And the phone lines are open at this time.
Thank you.
This is Lynn from Hopkins again.
Hi.
I have begun to put me time on my calendar. So once a month, all day long is my day to do whatever I want to do.
Nice.
And I tell my family that this is my day. Don't ask me to do anything because I'm not going to do it.
Very good. So you're setting boundaries. You're making that time. You're blocking it out in your schedule.
Yeah.
That's great.
This is Linda in Oregon, and before I leave for the day, I usually write a to-do list for the next day so that it doesn't haunt me at night. Oh, well, I remember to do that, and it seems to work well for me.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So it's like the last thing you do, and then you leave your work at work.
It stays here.
Great.
This is Emily in Ohio Valley. One thing I do what the to-do list for the next day, but if I'm in the car or if I have something that I remember that I forgot to do, I'll call and leave myself a voicemail so I don't forget it and I don't have to worry about forgetting it.
There you go. Yeah, or I'll tell you, somebody will tell me something. I say, could you just call my house and leave me that message, please? So they tell me something on the fly.
We're texting. That works
Texting.
too.
Yeah.
Getting somebody to text you a reminder.
Absolutely.
Hi, this is Scott from Northern New England. One thing I've done in the past couple of years is I set aside 2 or 3 days a week after work for about 45 minutes. I go for a run, but right near my office. So I do it before I go home and get it out of the way. And it's a real stress reliever.
Yeah, that's great. And you're doing it as a part of your day. It's like it's like the last thing on your schedule for that day.
Right, I kind of built it into my schedule.
Yeah. Very good. Anyone else? Time for one more, because it just feels good.
Well, Gloria, I think before we shut down the phone lines, we actually do have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's anything, just thinking about not just this session, but the other two as well, if there's anything that we've covered that, in thinking about it afterwards, you all have felt like you had some questions about or comments that you'd like to make, maybe things that you've thought about that, in retrospect you go, wow, I do this really well, and I'd like to share that with the group. We have time for that if folks would like to bring up any of those items.
This is Lynn again. I have a question. I got disconnected on the part where you started talking about supervision, and the first person that was speaking was a male, and so I kind of missed his whole presentation. So if you could give me a synopsis of what he said. Then my question would be, I play the role of project manager and study coordinator, and I did delegation as to one of the RAs. I've kind of allowed her to be the lead RA and take a lot of the study coordinator responsibilities off my hands. But it still feels like it's a lot trying to balance both positions. So if you could give me a synopsis, or you all could give me a synopsis of what he said and kind of give me ideas how to balance that. Second question.
Understood. Was Scott or Ed?
I'm not sure who it was. I know it was a male who was speaking on the supervision part when you first started talking about it.
Yeah, I think it was Scott.
Scott. That sounds like Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was providing just kind of an overview of the supervision that we've employed as a lead node managing one of the CTN studies.
Okay.
And how it's kind of not like direct supervision on the ground level or site level, but it was a way that we could work with sites to make sure that the protocol was being conducted consistently. And so we tried a variety of methods to do that, like having routine calls with the research staff, the medical clinicians, and the counseling staff.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And so your second question about supervising the lead RA,
or basically it's how to balance being the project manager and the study coordinator, if you will. I did the delegation part and putting a lot of the responsibility on someone who I classified as the lead RA. But how do I still kind of balance the remaining portion of me being study coordinator and the project manager, if that makes sense?
So one of the things that you would still need to do is make sure that she's doing what you've assigned to her, right? Kind of following up on the delegation piece. And if things are going well, you might find that there are other things that you could delegate to her or to other people who work with you. But, I think it's doing some of those time management techniques and coming up with a solid list of the stuff you have to do, having these good tracking procedures in place can really help.
Okay.
Do others have advice for Lynn, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have advice. This is Ed at Delaware Valley, but I was wondering whether or not there was a mechanism that we could set up, since we all are so good at during these sessions, but once this session is over, it would have been nice to have some kind of a bulletin board that we can key into electronically and ask the questions that never bother to get asked. For instance, I have sort of an ongoing question about, well, if I have a nurse that is, being supported, 50% of the salary is from the clinic and 50% is from the study, and how do you deal with performance appraisals and conflicts of time constraints and everything with the CTP? And I'm always interested in hearing tips about those kinds of things. But I don't know that it's really a discussion point for the webinar, but if we had a bulletin board that we could ask each other questions and ask for general tips and things like that, it might be useful. So I'm delegating. My homework is for somebody at MS to come up with a website bulletin board that we can ask these questions of ourselves.
I think that's a great suggestion, Ed, and it really plays right into that last point of having a support system.
Okay.
Is so often, in the past, we've had more structured support systems that are no longer available to us in the CTN. And as a project manager, I know that it's not at all uncommon for me to pick up the phone and call somebody who I know is a project manager on some other study and say, hey, how did you guys handle this? We're checking with somebody here who's a project manager on another study and asking for their thoughts on it. And in fact, here at Ohio Valley, we actually have implemented an every other week project manager meeting. It started out as a training that really is what this 3-session thing was based on, but has since morphed into more of a support group for us those of us that are managing protocols, to sit together and just kind of talk and brainstorm and listen to each other and see how we can help each other. So I applaud you, Ed, and Liz, I don't know what you can do with that, but I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, Frankie, there's mechanisms for doing that with LiveLink. I don't know what everybody's availability with LiveLink. Perhaps I can put that in the survey that I'll send out to everybody after the training session, but there are mechanisms in place to get that done through LiveLink. The other opportunities we could make available to people is a semi-regular phone call for people to have a roundtable.
Well, that might be a good question for the survey as well. What would meet your needs better?
Yeah, a call or a bulletin board.
Kind of a bulletin board chat group or something.
And also the CTN members can feel welcome to use the CTN training at ms.com to post questions or like that for me to disseminate to other people. Okay.
It's almost like a listserv.
My question with the LiveLink is how many people actually have access to LiveLink and keep it current. That would support the project management toolkit well, because we can continue to add to that library. Okay.
Yeah, we definitely want to encourage that. Encourage people to add to the toolkit things that work for them that they are willing to share with others.
I do want to get back to Lynn's second question, though. I want to see if anybody else had any thoughts about, having to wear 2 hats at once. And after you've delegated everything you can think of to delegate, and you still find managing both of those hats burdensome, how do you handle that? And I wondered if anybody else had any thoughts about that. guess my recommendation would just be to if you can't delegate down, then go up a level and see what you can work out with other folks. You know, whether there's maybe someone who's your supervisor or someone who's got a position similar to you who could help take some miscellaneous stuff off your plate for a while.
Okay.
But it can be tricky. I mean, there are just flat-out times when you're busier than others.
Right.
And sometimes it's just really crazy. But if that, you know, if you find that too many things are just slipping through your fingers, it's okay to ask for help.
Okay. Thank you. And if people think of something later, you can send me an email or send it through Liz, and she can send it to me if she doesn't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Thank you.
Tough spot. Any other questions or thoughts out there, comments that folks would like to share?
This is Roberta at the Southwest Node. It's difficult sometimes because of budget restraints. Right now I'm a supervisor and QA and part PC, so it's important to go to your node coordinator or the PI, site PI, and talk to them and see if they have really good ideas too.
Okay. Yeah, I just think that's critical to never be afraid to say, look, I need some help with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Asking for help should get added to the self-care list.
Any other questions or burning desires to share? Okay, well, we have one more thing that we all have to do, and just leave the lines open for this. Now, our train is heading into the station. And those of you that have ever seen a train pull into a station, what happens? The engineer and the conductor do something. They blow the whistle. So I actually, when I made up these slides, this slide had a whistle sound bite on it. But because of the way the webinar is set up, that didn't work. So on the count of 3, with the phone lines open, we all have to whistle the train into the station. Are you ready? Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. That's great. That's great. Yay. Well, you know, we have covered so much stuff over these past 3 sessions, and again, I just really want to thank you all for joining and for sharing your thoughts and questions. And I really, really hope that you've enjoyed this ride.
Yes, I have.
Don't forget to check out the Project Manager Toolkit on LifeLink. And again, anything that you find there, feel free to adopt or, you know, adapt it to any needs that you might have in your node. And so now that you have gone through the training, you can call yourself a true CTN conductor. And here is your hat.
Thank you.
Where proudly you all have earned it. Thank you all for joining us, and best of luck to you as you go through the protocols.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Frankie and Gloria.
Bye. Bye.